Hey friends, welcome back to the Collective's Conversations podcast. I got to sit down with Dave Barnes. Dave's a singer, songwriter, funny man, dad, so many things. So we got to sit down and talk about his music, his humor, and his own podcast, Dadville. This is one of the most entertaining conversations I've got to have here on the podcast. You're going to love Dave. If you're going, Dave Barnes, I know that name. Well, if you've ever heard the song God Gave Me You, either his version or the multi-platinum Grammy-nominated Blake Shelton version, Dave's the songwriter of that. But he's so much more than a songwriter, and this was a fun and incredible conversation. So here's our conversation with Dave Barnes. Welcome back to the Collective's Conversations podcast. I have a brand new friend with me. I guess we could say friends. We've talked off air for like 3 minutes now, so I think we're friends at this point.
That's all I need. I need about a minute.
Dave Barnes, singer-songwriter, fellow podcaster of the Dadville podcast, which is one of my favorites. He's had 10 full-length albums and 2 of my favorite Christmas albums. I'm just going to put that out there. I love the Christmas music. And we'll get to that in a minute. You're also a well-known songwriter for Carrie Underwood, Thomas Rhett, Tim McGraw, Reba, Need to Breathe, my favorite band, Dan and Shay, Florida Georgia Line, and the list goes on. I hit the Spotify Dave Barnes songwriter list. It was like 200 songs deep. So that extra 30 cents this week that you made is for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. They'll go to my children's free water.
Free water
at whatever restaurant of our choosing.
Yeah, I make my kids get water too, because like $3 for a drink is outlandish.
Bro,
so
get out of here. Get out of here.
So I got to ask, like, breaking news in the SEC world. Are you a sports guy?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So, and you're from the Knoxville area.
Yep.
Nick Saban retires as a. Yep. I assume you're a Vol fan.
Here's the trick. You sort of stepped into a trap here because.
Okay.
Forgive me. I grew up in Mississippi, so huge State fan. Both sets of my grandparents met and fell in love at State, and basically my mom and dad did too. So this is like DNA kind of allegiance. Now the trick with that though is I would have gone there absolutely if I'd stayed there, if we'd lived there through my college years. Mm-hmm. But we moved. My dad planted a church in Knoxville, like you said, when I was a junior in high school. So I didn't really swap allegiances. I sort of stayed with State, but it sort of diluted my allegiance just because I was so far away. Right. I had so many friends go to UT, and then I had friends that played for UT football at the time, and so I kind of I followed them then because it was a really fun But I never actually fully converted, and so I'm a little wayward in my sort of fandom because my wife is an Ole Miss graduate and like heavy Ole Miss fan, which causes a little bit of a house divided. But while I love and follow State, it's not like it is if I'd have gone there or something. So, gotcha. But I do. I mean, I think Pete Carroll, Belichick, Saban. I mean, and Vrabel for us for the Titans. Yeah. I mean, it's been a massive week and a weird New England sort of centric week because those guys have all sort of coached in the same little unit at some point.
So when you moved to Knoxville, because I moved to Southeast Tennessee, north of Chattanooga to go to college, and when I got here, I was indoctrinated with a certain statement. Now I got to know when you got to Knoxville if they taught you this. God bless and go Vols. Was that that's it? Told to you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, going to State games my whole life was so fun, and you got cowbells and the whole thing. Yeah. But the first time I went to that stadium, and at the time it was the biggest stadium. It was like 102,000.
It's a small village, yeah.
And I grew up in a town of 8,000.
Oh wow!
So you could have fit my town in there 10 times plus, and it was just I couldn't understand this kind of fandom, and even still, I mean, it's really mind-boggling,
Yeah, it's crazy. So you don't go to UT, you end up in TSU. So how was it the music that took you there?
It was God, honestly. It was God's weird sovereign guiding of a million things. Basically, the story's too long to tell, but the abbreviated version is when we transferred my grades from Mississippi to Knoxville. And Farragut, where I went to high school, is an extremely academic public school. Yeah. Like it was in the top 10 of Red Book that year for public schools in the nation. It's a really good public school, in college prep public school. And so my grades, I literally mean this, by God's divine intervention, they went up like 0.5, 0.7. So my GPA, which would have been about probably in the low threes, went up to like high threes, like 3.8, 3.9 or something crazy. And in that school, that's a huge deal because you're talking about national merit finalists, and we had every single year Farragut has a kid or two that does perfect on either the ACT or the SAT. And so because I bumped so high, and I was only there for 2 years, like it made me look amazing. And then I did okay enough on my SAT that the ACT, and that like, schools were kind of like, hey, so when MTSU came and did their college day, if you want to go to MTSU, come to the Red Wing, 322, and there'll be a representative. And so I knew that they did music there, and so I went and met with the girl, Sharon Thomas, shout out Sharon, and she was like, hey, your grades are great, and we're really trying to get more Farragut kids to MTSU. I think we could probably figure something out. And so my mom and dad, mom and dad kind of have that conversation. I'm just sort of like, drumming on my desk. And so sure enough, they get a call like a couple months later, and Sharon's like, hey, we can offer Dave a full ride, and we'd love to have him. And I remember dad hanging up the phone and looking at me and going, congratulations, you're going to MTSU. I mean, so it wasn't really a conversation. I did want to go there.
So,
I mean,
it wasn't the Lord as much as his dad. Dad told you.
Well, honor your father and mother, and so that's what makes it biblical. And so anyway, I did want to go there, but it wasn't. It was much more. I just didn't have a really strong opinion. I knew places I didn't want to go to UT. There were a few places around there I didn't want to go, but I just hadn't thought about it much. And so by the time it popped up, we had visited. I was like, looks great, let's do it.
So was that 1996? You went to college?
Yeah.
Okay. So funny story. And I think I see my life with a lot of near misses. So I'm from Illinois originally. So I graduated high school in 95, took a year off. I say took a year off. I went to work and that got really boring. And I was like, I should go to college, right? Yep. So me and a couple of buddies come down to Middle Tennessee to play golf. And we play this course in Murfreesboro. I don't even know the name of it. I just know that there's a house I hit 4 times because I was hooking my drive. So, like, I didn't even leave a note, but, like, I'm like, this place is amazing. I just fell in love with Middle Tennessee. And so I'm headed back home, and this is, like, I'm going to date myself. Like, I pull out the gigantic atlas, right, the road atlas.
Yeah,
I'm like,
of course.
Where's there a college nearby? And so, lo and behold, MTSU. And so I go home. I fill out the application. I send in my housing deposit, all the things. I'm going, right?
Well, you're going. Yeah.
And my mom's like, I think that's too far. So, honoring mom, I stayed in state, went to Illinois State for 2 years, and then transferred to Lee and 2 years later. Yeah. But I was that close to being your roommate. We would have been roommates and best friends.
We would have started so many bands.
And here's the thing. Like, I wanted to be in a band. But I have no rhythm, Dave. Like, I can't clap on beat.
That's okay. I
have Grammy award-winning producers tell me to quit. So
yeah, what do they know at this point? You know what I mean?
Well, I won't say who it is because he knows a lot and has made a lot of money. So
touche.
As have you in the music industry. You've got a brand new album out. I've got to know Featherbrained Wealth Motel.
Yeah.
Where's that title come from?
Well, I haven't. It's funny. I'm the most verbose, and I'm not like a secrets guy. But this is like the first time in my career that I haven't said what the actual meaning is because I just think it's so fun not to. I think I'm going to reveal it. But I will say this: one of the things that's really the backstory quickly about this record is I just listened to the Beatles in 2022. That's the only music that I listened to, and so inspired this record. I wrote a record from that time, after listening and doing this deep dive of the Beatles. One of the things that was of paramount importance to me with this project was I wanted from the beginning to the end, as we would say in the South, the rooter to the tutor, I wanted everything to be on brand with that messaging. So in other words, like what you can do with a record like that is you make it, and then you call it something that's kind of in your wheelhouse of album titles you've already used before, and then you use some really cool pictures on the front. But to me, that was like, that's not what we're doing here. I want this thing from the minute you see it, which is usually people's first interaction with it, on the Spotify, DSPs, whatever you're looking at. to go, whoa, what is this? And it sort of sets the tone for like what you're about to hit play on. And then I wanted the title to be the same. And so I thought about so many records I love from the 60s, and they always have this like, what the heck? Like, what does that mean? And so I think for me, and I think one of the things that's really tricky too, I think you'll understand, is like, having done, as you said, 12 records and another, 4 EPs, it's just a lot of music. And so I think one of the things that you're always warring against as a 45-year-old musician and artist is it's not that people don't like you. I mean, you have fans. That's why I still can make a living. It's just trying to get those people to re-engage and to sort of not take that same expectation into every new project you have, because I think we all do that. Even the artists we love the most, there is some sense of like, I know what you do and that's why I like it. And so if they have a new album, you're like, yeah, it'll be great. But when it's their 10th record, you're kind of like, I'm sure it's great, I'll get around to it. But I got stuff going on. Excuse me, I got this cold I'm trying to kill. So for me, I was like, what is going to be the most jarring thing I can do? And so much of that was the packaging and the album title, because I just wanted people to go, wait, what? Like, let me hit play and see what happens, instead of sort of like, yeah, Dave's great, and I'm sure it's like kind of acoustic stuff and cool, I'll get to it in a couple weeks. So that was so much of the title was just going, how much can I, how jarring, how much can I sort of shake people out of, oh yeah, Dave's great, and so
I'm glad you brought the Beatles, because I've listened to the album a couple times through now, and I keep going, this is very Sgt. Pepper's. Like, some of the instrumentation,
I hope so,
and all the things. And I was like, I didn't want to say it because I'm like, come on, there's no way Dave Barnes is going Sgt. Pepper's on me. Like, but like some of the instrumentation, things just stood out, and I was like, this sounds very Beatles like. And so I'm glad you referenced it, because I didn't want to have to bring.
No,
it up.
absolutely, 1,000%. That's the goal.
Good. Awesome. It's a great record. I encourage everybody to listen to it on Spotify. Yeah. I'm an Apple guy. Sorry if that pays less.
No.
I mean, that's
I do both. No, I do. Apple's actually better.
Oh, good to know. I'll keep playing on Apple then. So you said you grew up in PK. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'm a GPK. So my grandfather was a pastor.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever feel there was a expectation to follow the family business and go into ministry?
No, not from them. I think I osmotically did that. I think I just went, this is a known entity. It's probably the same as every kid with their parents' job to some degree, is like, it's just the known entity. You just, whether you like it or not, you've seen it. And so you go, oh, like dad's an accountant, I should be an accountant, or dad and mom are lawyers, and I'll be like, whatever. Like, so for me, I think it was as much like, oh, this is a world that I really understand.
Right.
And so I did, I think, I thought I was going to go to state, and then I was probably going to go to seminary and, go on to be a youth pastor or whatever I thought at the time. So not from them, but I think for me, I was like, and I think I would have enjoyed it. I think I do. And I have a lot of pull toward that, where I'm an elder at my church here in Nashville. And so, I have that in me, but it was not dad and mom, and no. In fact, I think they would laugh and say, "You should definitely do something different. Like, this is like music. You really have to be called to do it. It's a really, it's a heavy job."
So even with the music and sort of, I think there's always expectations put on either by ourselves or somebody else. As you started to do music, and I think your history is you learned to play guitar in college or started to write songs in college.
Yeah.
Was there, and especially in the 90s, there was the explosion of passion, and worship music was like taking off. Was that ever either a thought or sort of like, I should go do that since I'm a church kid?
Oh, I lived with so much guilt and shame, self-induced, around like, shouldn't I, if I'm a Christian, shouldn't I be writing worship songs or like Christian songs? Because, there was still a hangover in the 2000s of like that late 90s CCM, really great music, like the Audio Adrenaline's, DC Talks, Wes King, and whoever you're listening to, that music King? That was like,
wow,
come on, girl, what do you know about Wes King? But like, I've been wearing his stuff out this week randomly. But like, there was really compelling, original, artistic music in that season. It wasn't quite as worship centric. It was much more like, and so, in the 2000s, that was still happening up until I'd say even like, late 2000s. My friends like Brandon Heath were making records with these really cool records. I was kind of like, I should go do something like that. And I just couldn't do it. Like every time I picked up a guitar and I would try that. It was so bad, and it felt so inauthentic and trite and forcing things into, especially lyric, things. And so I just finally was like, this is not what I'm supposed to do. And it felt like any energy I gave to the more mainstream thing, the doors opened and people came to the shows. And so it was a weird season of trying to really acclimate myself to this new sort of thinking of like, oh, I'm going to play in like bars and clubs and colleges and theaters. And then every now and then I'll do like a church show. Whereas, I originally thought like, I'm going to be like in churches and then I'll have like outreach shows,
Yeah. And it's interesting because I felt like in that time period, like 2000s, it was like everybody was doing cool music and then everybody made a worship album. It was like Jeremy Camp had like 4 great albums and then there was a worship album. And like Michael W. Smith did a bunch of music and then there was a worship album. And suddenly they were worship artists. And I mean, no knock on it. It just felt like that was a major shift. And following sort of your trajectory in your albums, you didn't make that shift. You kept making authentic music. You kept writing music, and now you're writing music in genres outside of CCM and other places. Which Nashville's a weird spot, man. My daughter goes to school there. We've hung out there quite a bit. How have you managed sort of maintaining this follower of Jesus and being in this industry that kind of walks a weird line with it?
It's funny. There are so many. I wrote with a guy yesterday who's a new country artist, and he's such a great guy, sweet guy, loves the Lord. It's like I feel like, and it may just be the Bible Belt thing, but there's so many Christian people in Nashville doing music in every iteration. I mean, some of my closest friends are country artists, and I think all of them are all church attending believers, and so it's not, I mean, I think people can misunderstand how much of the Wild Wild West it is here because it really does. I mean, look, I'm not saying everybody believes what we believe, but the majority do, and so it's not, I mean, like anything, you're having to stick to your guns. And I was just reading beginning of the Sermon on the Mount yesterday, but like, letting your light shine and those things sitting on the hill. But I think at the same time, it's not, it's not living in some, Eastern Bloc country where you're scared to just say the name, even to say God or something. It's nothing like that. It's very, I think the danger of that, which so well from being in the South, working here, is like, it gets a little more comfortable. I think that's probably the bigger struggle in a lot of ways. It's just kind of like, it's just sort of an assumption, and then we all can get really lazy because it is easier to do that here than probably most places in the world. So
it's what you do. It's what everybody does. It's everybody goes to church. Everybody does that.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Nashville, and you can probably speak this better, is what happens on Broadway is way different than what happens on Music Row. Like Broadway is its own little animal, Music Row is not that. Before I visited Nashville, I thought like Broadway was Music Row. We had that misconception.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah.
Like they're.
Oh, it.
Not
that ends
apart, but they are.
That ends at like I mean, once you basically get out of downtown, it ends as you cross over into sort of like any other part of Nashville.
Yeah. So let's talk. God Gave Me You. Right. That's the big song. If people know Dave Barnes, they know God Gave Me You, either from the CCM world or from your, I guess, new friend Blake Shelton. Like, I guess you guys are buddies. I've heard
my benefactor.
Your benefactor, yeah. So I've heard your friend John Acuff tell the story, but I want to hear you tell it, that it was a rental car that Blake Shelton got into when he first heard your song. Is that accurate?
Yeah, he was driving, as told to me, he was driving from the airport back to his home in Oklahoma and was just going through stations, and my song was, I think this is like late night too, but my song, this is when my version was on Christian radio, and he heard it and like loved it and pulled over and, downloaded it because there were no, there wasn't a Spotify at the time, so he bought it off Apple Music, whatever, iTunes. And so then it was this funny journey of like, it went from my friend, one of my dear friends worked at Warner Brothers at the time, which is the label he's on. Mm-hmm. And she called me, she's like, you want to hear the most random thing in the world? Blake has heard God Gave Me You, and he wants to have it in his wedding. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, does he want me to play? She's like, I don't think so, but just thought you'd think that was cool. And I was like, great. Well, then it was like, hey, he's going to record it. And I was like, well, that's even better. And then she and my wife surprised me and a bunch of my friends one afternoon. I came home from writing, and there were all these people at my house, and Kelly, this girl, came out, and they did had champagne and sparklers and said, "Hey, it's his second single off the record." And then from there it's just been like chaos, it's like the song that it's weird. I remember seeing this, it's been about a decade ago, so I don't know if it'd still be on this list, but Billboard, which is Billboard, put out the top 100 biggest country songs of all time, and it's on that list.
I think
that is
may still be.
That is saying that out loud, I'm still I don't even know what that means. You know what I mean? So it's a weird, one of the things I love about this job is that you really can be so detached from these things that you create. You really do sort of make these little things that then fly off and have their own lives, and they just sort of send you money for them. it's a great living.
Where do I sign up for that?
I know,
how do I get that gig?
But it's so detached, because how it's performing, I don't have anything to do with anymore. Yeah. I've done my job, and now people just kind of, you talk to people who tell you how much they love it, or you hear it on the radio, and it's just weird. It's such a it's a really weird, wonderful part of this job, but really jarring. It's it's hard because it's not, it's not like a chair you built that you sit in and you go, this is the chair, and I sit in every day, and I built this chair. It's like somebody else is sitting in that chair in some other house. It's just weird. It's a really bizarre experience.
So what other industry, because the music industry is so unique in that you create art and you set it out there in hopes of somebody embracing it, and not always with instantaneous feedback, because you may have wrote the song 6-8 months ago or 6-8 years ago. What in the other industries, for people who are listening, they would that would make sense to them, that they would make something that they just put out there and it just sits for a while.
It has native to that part of my life, my songwriting life, are all these really weird, because some stat, this is crazy. One of my really dear friends was on the Bobby Bones podcast, and he and Bobby were talking about, Bobby was just so people can understand how songwriting works. He's and this is years ago because the guy's had a lot more hits since then, but he's how many number ones have you had? And I think at the time my buddy Jonathan Singleton had I don't know, 8 or 9. And Bobby's okay, so then how many top 20s or whatever? And he's I don't know, another 5. And he's okay, so let's say that's 12 or 13 songs. How many songs you write a year? And Jonathan was I bet you I write 200, maybe 250. He's so if you start doing the math, your failure rate is through the roof. I mean, it's what is that, 90% of the time? If you do 5 years of songwriting, and you have, and John had been in town at this point 10 years,
right.
So he's you've written 1,000+ songs, and what percentage is that have been profitable? So you have to really get used to sort of pouring your guts into something over and over and over and over, just to have people be no, and still kind of keep your head up about it. I can't think of many jobs that are like that, where the failure rate is 90% plus, but you still are making a living doing that thing. It's really bizarre. You have to have a really weird kind of armor.
I grew up playing baseball, and the failure rate in baseball is 70%. And you could be a star. But nobody fails at 90%. If I was failing at 90% any job, they would be fired. So, I would be fired. Yeah. So in the songwriting, this is again, the wannabe artist in me. If I had any skill, I'd have gone to Nashville, been broke, lived under a bridge, all the things, trying to make it. But is there a track that you've cut or you've written that you go, hey, I really love this song, but it's on a shelf on hold somewhere, or not even on hold, it's a piece of art you love, but nobody's ever seen it or heard it?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding cheesy, I bet 20% of the songs that I write every year, I'm those are great songs. Great with a capital G. I love these songs. In my 10 years of doing this as a quote unquote professional songwriter, there's probably 10 that I'm I will go to the grave over this song. I'm telling you, this is a, and I'm not saying a hit, forget all that. I'm just telling you it's worth being recorded and put on a record somewhere. And so, every now and then life works in these funny ways. And it's really weird you're actually asking me this. Apple Music did this rad amazing program. It made me want to hug everybody in this building. Where they actually, and the song is actually, it's really funny. I think it may be even out today, but they went to songwriters and said, "Hey, we're gonna do this campaign, like initiated by Apple Music, not by Music Row, not by publishers, where we want to exhume sort of old demos that sort of made their way around Nashville everybody loves, but just nobody ever cut them, and then we're gonna find artists to cut them." And so me and a friend of mine, John Green, and another friend named Laura Veltz wrote this song called Lights Out that we loved. And it made its way around Nashville. Artist after artist would text me and be like, dude, I love this song. But they just couldn't make it work for them. And so Apple did this program where every month now, so that song got recorded. And then it's coming out, I think, this week.
Cool.
So you have these moments where something will get exhumed. I'll get a call from somebody and be like, dude, hey, so-and-so cut that song from 5 years ago. And I'm like, oh, yes, But I think a lot of the time, my industry, the music industry, novelty is king. And so the new thing is always more exciting than the old thing. And I think that's probably the way of the world in a lot of ways. But the problem with that is the longer something's been out, the less attractive it is to people. And so I think that's why you have this sort of like period with a song. You have like a couple of weeks while everybody in Nashville's still hearing it and it's getting passed around that you're like, if it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen right now. In fact, there's a joke in the songwriting world with like, you always want to get in with an artist like the 2 weeks before they record because they'll tell you they got their 10 songs, but that onslaught that happens in the last 2 weeks by a lot of publishers is like, send the best song now because it's the newest when they go in. Right. It's not the song that they've loved for a year. They've started singing it in shows. That song will get axed for the newer thing because it's just new, Right. And so you really have to have a weird sort of discipline and sort of like, armor around your heart to go to know this is how this industry works. And for better or worse, it just is what it is. And but the good part is every now and then you have one of those songs that sort of pops back up and does a thing.
Yeah. So I got to know, what's the love affair? I know it's January. We're past Christmas. But what's the love affair with Christmas, man? Because you've got 2 albums. Yeah. You've co-wrote a bunch of Christmas songs.
I've got an EP, too, that we released a couple years ago. I think for me, writing-wise, Christmas is maybe one of the only genres of music that I would argue immediately if you've done it or not as a songwriter. Like, if you've hit the mark. The second you strum the last chord, playing it through the first time, there's a pretty immediate realization of like, we got it or we didn't. And I think, I don't think you can say that for basically any other genre because it's just such a thing. It's nostalgic, it's warm, it's sweet, it's comforting, it's and so I think for me, I love it because it really does have this sort of like, oh, that's definitely it or that's definitely not it. And then we move on. And so for me, it's very satiating because it feels like, even when you don't get it right, you're like, okay, I know I didn't get it right. It's not, I don't know, maybe. And it's very specific. Like you're dealing with very specific words and themes. I would even argue musically, you're kind of, so it's not, it's a little more writing to assignment than it is sort of like esoteric, ethereal. What are we doing today? Where you can go anywhere. It feels like, no, that's kind of what we're doing. And so it's fun as a writer because I love that. I love that feeling of like a succinct target that I'm shooting for,
This is personal opinion. And again, I'm willing to see a battle royale over this.
Okay.
What do we have to do to get you the title of Mr. Christmas from Brett Eldridge? Like he's kind of self-selected himself as that. But I feel like Dave Barnes is in the running of that conversation.
We would probably have to do some kind of arm wrestling. I'm assuming in like a cold climate, know.
Can we set that up? What do we got to do to make that happen?
He would probably win, so I'm not going to do it.
He's a beast, yeah.
Plus, he's smoldering. He's got smoldering good looks in. His voice is so well suited for Christmas music. I love what he's doing. I always think it's fun when people sort of get that, oh, this is like, this is really fun and people enjoy this. Because I think, I've talked to so many artists that are just like, I don't know how to do it. Because I'll get these calls or texts or somebody want to go to breakfast and be like, I'm thinking about doing Christmas, like doing a Christmas album. Do you have any advice? I'm always like, you got to do it. Like, it's like one of the smartest, just on a business level. Like, forget any affinity for it even. Just like it comes around every year. So if you're just making that decision, it's that. But for me, it's just so fun because it's, it's like it's some of my favorite music in the world is that music.
Yeah, and Brett does a great job. I'm not no offense to Brett Eldridge.
No,
he probably won't
amazing.
listen to this episode, but his voice is so suited for that crooner kind of
big
Christmas
bandy kind
sound.
of thing.
Yeah, which is great. So let's talk Dadville.
Awesome.
How did that happen? What in your mind said the singer-songwriter guy should make a podcast with his friend Jon McLaughlin about being a dad?
Well, I love people. I love talking, and I love talking to people. And so you put those together, and what do you got? Bippity boppity boop. And so I was like, this is probably 2019. I was like, I would really love to do a podcast. I thought I was going to do a music one. We sat with WME, who was booking me at the time, and they had a podcast division. And so I sat with the girl there, and I said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. She's like, all right. And, again, this is 5 years ago. So, while podcasting is everywhere now, it wasn't at the time. It was a big deal, but it wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
And even then, she was like, tell me your ideas. And I was like, all right, music. She's like, nope, too many. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, there's too many. It won't matter. So she's like, dude, tell me this. What are things you're really passionate about? Because she's like, because here's the thing about a podcast. You're going to talk about this all the time. And I was like, well, I love my kids. And she was like, that is not a space people are in, like dads with podcasts.
That's true.
And I was like, oh, and she was like, so I think if you're going to do one, I may do that. And I loved it. I was like, done. This would be so great. So one of my best friends, a guy named Seth Philpott, and I were talking about it. And I was like, man, I think I'm going to do this thing called Dadville, but it's kind of overwhelming. And he said, why don't you get Jon to do it with you? Because Jon lives directly across the street. And we talk about all this stuff anyway. Jon and Amy are some of our closest friends. And we basically have a cult because our kids are always playing and we always see each other.
For those that don't know, Jon McLaughlin is who he's referring to.
Yeah,
a
singer-songwriter.
Also a recording artist, also has great Christmas music. So I'm sure Christmas time
and
is
it's
fun
probably, my top 5 funniest friends. Jon is absolutely hysterical. So I was like, oh my gosh. So, Jon and I were hanging out after. I was like, I got this crazy thought. I want to do this podcast. I want to call it Dadville. I'd love for you to do it with me if you wanted to. And he was like, done. He's like, I don't even need to think about it, man. So, that was, so we started in like 2020, right? Kind of COVID is, actually we started in probably 19 and then I think we started releasing episodes in 2020. So, it's just been so fun. Jon and I, literally 2 days ago, we texted each other and like, man, I love doing this. Don't you? Like we had a couple podcasts earlier this week and he was like, isn't this just so fun? So it's really been truthfully one of those like sort of backdoor blessings things in that we always knew we would enjoy it, but I think I know we get more from it than probably anybody does. And it's become sort of the selfish pursuit, of just kind of it's given us reason to talk to all these people I'd probably not have a chance to talk to. I've learned a million things. And the best part to me is, still being in the wild and somebody walking up and just going, hey, man, I just want to tell you, like, we're huge Dadville fans. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, So it's been a real gift. I've been really thankful for it.
So does that mean more somebody coming up to you or maybe on par with somebody going, hey, I love God gave me you?
Yeah. It's, the thing... What happens, and it's always so sweet, is people go, dude, love Dadville. Love your music too. It's awesome. It's great. Really love Dadville. And I'm always like, okay, you don't have to qualify it. But yeah, it's just fun. It's like, I think the best part about it is Jon nor I ever think about anybody actually listening to it. We just kind of do it. And then we're like, cool. And then every now and then when somebody goes, hey, I listened, it was really great. I'm like, oh, thanks. Like last night I had a girl at church, at Wednesday night church. One of my friends who's a mom was like, so naturally was like, we're in the middle of a conversation, catching. I was like, how y'all doing? How was Christmas? She's like, great. So, we were listening yesterday. And when Jon said something, and I was like, oh, you listen to Dadville? She's like, oh, yeah, me and the girls. And I was like, your kids? She's like, yeah, we listen to a lot. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I didn't know that, So it's a funny thing to just see how much it sort of lives its own life. Again, just these things you create that sort of like go out there and, are doing their own things.
Yeah, this is actually my second podcast, but our first podcast was called The Leadership Drip, and it was about young adults in the local church. And a friend of mine from college, we sat down and we were talking to local church leaders and young adults and influencers. And again, it opened doors that never in my lifetime. I sat down with people and leaders who were just extremely like high platform leaders in Christendom who were like, yeah, I'll come talk to you for 45 minutes by Zoom and tell you everything I know. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, and I don't care if anybody listens. It's like, you're going to talk to me for 45 minutes, like knowing it would cost me whatever amount to get in a room with you somewhere.
That's right.
And it's been, again, I love that. It's so selfish. Like, this is selfish for me, Dave. Let's be honest. I posted and tagged you about Christmas music to hope that you would reply so we'd have this conversation.
Yeah.
It's
I know.
selfish,
I know exactly.
So
I know exactly.
But it's great because I remember we were about a year into the podcast and we got invited to go to Passion. We were just there as guests, and I'm walking through the bins of 50,000 people. And this young lady who's a young influencer who we'd had some connection with on Instagram, she followed the show, is screaming my name, Jeff. Like, and I'm like, who knows me here? I'm like this small like town pastor that has a podcast. And sure enough, she's like, oh, I love the show and all the stuff. And I'm like, you just never know this art, whether it's music, podcasting, book writing, whatever it is, how it's affecting somebody and impacting their life. And I think that's the return. Like, you know, you're sponsored, your Dadville's probably making some sort of profit. I'm just like a guy in my house talking to people who like I want to talk to. So it's costing me more than I'll ever make. Unless AG1 wants to sponsor me like everybody else in the world.
I was going to say, shout out AG1.
Yeah. And, but it's the return to me is great. And so to make friends and have conversations with people and get in the room with people who probably I never would have. Like it just people that like now I run into them and like in real life, you're like, hey, we're friends, which like for a guy like me, like I thought would never happen. So
yeah, it's funny. Two of my favorite authors, who I wouldn't have really ever had a reason, ton of reasons, but never had a venue to know them. You know, never had a John Mark Comer and Harrison Scott Key are both like friends of mine now, and I'm like, what a cool thing, just because we got to sit and chat. You know, now like I know these guys. And it's really cool. Yeah. It's like that wouldn't have happened without the podcast, which is really cool.
Yeah, I'm that way with the Beviers. So the sons, like Addison and Arden, and like I see them, and I'm like you know, they're like the pinnacle of Christian like authors and whatever. And I'm like, I get in a room with them and like, hey, how are you? And we embrace, and it's like so weird, and text them like, hey, how are things going? It's just weird that's opened doors that I didn't know would open. Other than the relationships, how has Dadville opened doors that maybe music wouldn't have?
You know what it's done? I think that is really cool. I would say it's twofold. One, more people are contacting John and I for like having thoughts around parenting and being dads, which is really cool. You know, that aren't, to your point, aren't connected to what we do for a living. And that's always really exciting because it's something I could talk about a lot because I have so much passion for it. So that's really cool. I would say the second thing is it's also really just helped my music career because I think John and I laugh all the time, and this is also where it's really selfish, and I hate this word, but forgive me for saying it. But it really does thicken up your brand because it's like, I think, again, when John's in his early 40s, I'm 45, like, you know, it's like our demo, which is around our age, are really busy with life, and they're not really thinking about my music anymore. They are, but not like they used to. And so it's been fun to kind of re-engage a ton of those people in a way that they go, oh, this is a way for me to sort of stay in touch with you. It reminds me you do music, so maybe I go listen to that, and it's fun. So I think for us, it's also been really beneficial, honestly, for our careers, because I think it's just kind of kept us in people's brains a little more. And it never fails. Like I'll book, I'd say every, not a ticketed event, but like where somebody, has me come to do an event for them. It almost never fails that somebody mentions Dadville. And so there's no doubt that it's helping just kind of keep us in front of people, which is really great. So I'm really thankful for that too, which was not an intended consequence at all.
Right. Yeah. So you and John are very open about parenting, fatherhood, all the things. Like, so what has been maybe the greatest challenge of being a dad? What's been one of the hardest things that you had to walk through?
I think we're just now, my family, we're 12, 9, and 7. And we're just getting into kind of the emotional stuff. You know, we're sort of getting out of the physical tired. You know, kids aren't sleeping or, you know, whatever. And I can, you know, obviously we've had a million wise things said on Dadville, but one of them that I think as much about as any is, you know, somebody said the first half of your parenting with a child is like you're physically tired, and the back half is like you're emotionally tired. And I think Annie and I are just kind of getting into the emotionally tired stuff, and it really does feel like a whole new rule book. Like none of the rules worked that worked in the first half. You know, it's like it's all new things, and so with that exposure, I'm just seeing parts of me that I'm like, oh, gross, or like I just don't have reps. You know, I don't know how to do that.
Exactly.
I don't know when one of the child starts getting really sassy, and like in a way that's like a grown-up sass. It's not like a 6-year-old sass. It's like, oh, you know what you're doing, and you know like ways to hurt me that are very manipulative and mean. You know, like Annie and I both are kind of like, I mean, I feel like this might as well be a 6-month-old. And as far as that goes, like, I just don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, oh man, that got me way riled up. Like, I didn't know to not do that. Now, next time I know, don't engage in that way or whatever. So I think we're in a season where that's just really challenging. It's like, you know, it's just heavy. It's like, it just feels like, you know, you know this well, having your kids be the age they are, but it's a feeling of like real disconnect that's really sad, because you feel like this isn't you disobeying me in some little, you know, tantrum. This is like you are like, I'm trying to hurt your feelings, and it's like, God, that's not fun, you know.
So we have 5: 22, 19, 19, 16, and 15.
Yeah,
and
you know
like,
that well.
We've walked that, like the switch from like dad's the hero to dad's the enemy. And my wife has this really great question, like, and she poses it sometimes to the kids. She'll say, are you mad at me, or am I just handy? Because sometimes we as parents take the heat because they're angry with somebody else or something else in other circumstance that they can't put the anger towards. And so
that's true.
As parents, you just catch it because like it may have nothing to do with me, but like they're mad at somebody at school or something on the TikTok or whatever. But the heat's coming my way. Yeah. And so,
and that's the thing. I think that's the growth. That's the shift we haven't made yet. Annie and I are still taking stuff way too personally. You know what I mean? It's like you said it so well. We're just not doing a good job of going, oh, it's just you know, she's just mad because her friend said something to her at school today, and she's coming home, and you know, we're the punching bags. Instead, we're kind of like, oh, how dare you say that to me? You know. So we're having to grow some skin around that, you know, kind of an extra
It's hard.
layer. It is. Yeah. It's really hard.
And,
but at the same time, again, some of the best counsel we've gotten is, again, the house is the lab. You know, this is where they figure that stuff out. In fact, I saw a really cool stat the other day where they were like, when you see your kids fighting, you need to understand that some of that is them actually learning how to communicate with people. Like literally they are learning, when I yell, they yell back. When I say this mean word, they get mad. And I just thought, what a cool way to think about that too, is it's not always just like, why are you guys always fighting? It's like, this is the lab, man. This is the safe place. And I think that's something Annie and I have really talked about a lot lately, is like, in a weird way, it's a huge compliment to us that they're like, I can be myself and really let this stuff fly in here. And because I know it's safe, and I know that you guys are going to love me and you'll reprimand me. And I think for me, that helps a lot on those days where I'm like, this is Lord of the frickin' Flies in here. Like, who are you kids? You know, but realizing like, well, in a weird backhanded way, it's sort of a compliment, because they're like, no, I can like let it rip. You know, I'd be much more nervous if my kids were like really, really civil and quiet and too obedient. Honestly, I'd be like, this is not we're doing something wrong, because I'm not trying to turn you into little soldiers, you know, or mini me. In my sin, I am, but I want you to be you. And that means you're probably going to say something stupid or back talk, or, you know that this hurts my feelings, and then say it to me, you know? Yeah. And so I think that helps me a lot.
Yeah. We have a statement, and we try to follow through, that we're not trying to raise good kids. We're trying to raise good adults. Like,
yeah, that's true. That's great. Yep.
Like, cause like good kids are obedient, they're mindful, and
Yeah,
our
that's
kids
right.
are great
That's right.
in public. They've
That's right.
all been like super polite.
Yeah.
But we want them to be healthy, good adults who can thrive and survive and make it.
Yeah.
And all the things. And it's challenging. Like it's been one of the most. I think being a parent is one of the most challenging thing, especially through the teen and young adult years.
Yeah.
Young adult years are a whole nother.
Jesus
help me.
That's the thing that I think, and you know, this is I'm not saying this as clear as I want to say it, but to some degree, I'm kind of always like, look, as long as out in the world, they're civil and not entirely problematic, you know, within reason.
Yeah,
we're doing a good job. They can be whatever at home. I just want to see that they're figuring it out here, and then they're taking it out into the world where it really matters and working it out. You know, I'll never forget when Annie and I had our first meeting with one of our teachers, one of our kids, that we were really like, oof, this has been a tough year with this one. And the teacher was like, what a wonderful year. They have been so helpful and probably the leader of the class. And I remember Annie and I'm not kidding, Jeff. I went, I'm not kidding. Are you talking about our kid? And they were like, yes, and showed me the sheet. And we were like, and that for me was a huge moment of like, okay, this is valuable. So for me, I'm like, look, as long as they're not out there, as long as I can see out there that they're putting to what we're putting to use what we're learning in the house out there, I'm in. You know, like I don't want to be anybody's punching bag, but at the same time, like if they're onboarding this information in a way that is transferable to the real world, then cool, you know. But I think the problem I have is like, you know, when that's not, you know, when it's trouble out there, when you get the call from the teacher, you get the whatever, and then you're like, okay, this is not being applied like I want it to.
I think that's always been like the shock. Like you show up to parent teacher thing and they're like, what a wonderful child, and they're so helpful and whatever. And you're like, who are you? Are you sure you got my kid's stuff?
Yeah, this is
surely
wrong.
This is the wrong form, right?
Show me the top of that sheet.
Yeah. And so I agree. It's been part of the challenge. What some people don't know about you, Dave, let's shift gears a little bit, is you love comedy. Like,
oh yeah.
So you've done some stand-up comedy before. Is that the future of Dave Barnes? Are you going to take the road with John Crist? What's going on there?
Gosh, man. I think I'll always dabble. I don't see the thing that's really overwhelms me with comedy. I was talking to Annie about this the other night. The thing that's really tricky about comedy is, other than like a Netflix or a special, you're really only making money when you're doing it. Yeah. And so that requires you to go do it. It requires you to go do shows, to leave the house. And I already leave as much as I want to leave, you know, and that's not even a ton, but I just don't love it. I like being here. I want to be with my kids. I want to be with my friends and whatever, and my family. And so, you know, I think when I start staring down that thing, I'm like, and at least for this season, you know, if once the kids get older or out of the house or something, like, you know, who knows? Like maybe it's time to rip. But I just know, for now, I'm like, I'm not a big, other than God just being like, this is what I want you to do, I don't have a huge compulsion to do that, because that is the way it works. It's not something where, you know, you can have a cat, you know, you can post on your account, and maybe if you get sponsored and then you make money, because Clorox is like, we're going to pay you however much to do posts about the new Clorox wipes. But other than that, like, you know, you really have to go gig to make money. And so I'm just like, man, that is a
so
part
have you
of that.
always kind of like had this love for comedy and being funny? Were you the class clown?
Yeah,
or is it just something you stumbled into?
No. That has always been. And you know, I'm not the guy that was like, everybody's got to look at me. That's never been me. But I think the older I got, I learned very quickly and acutely how powerful it was. Like it got me a lot of things I wanted. Attention, you know, respect, or whatever you would call it. Friends. Or not, it didn't get me friends. You know what I mean? It's like, I just noticed like, wow, this is a currency that I for whatever reason have a pretty good amount of. And so it's really natural. It's not I have to work. You know, stand-up shows so much work, but you know, I think
I'd imagine
it is in me. It's not something that takes a lot of conjuring, and so I do love doing it. I love doing stand-up shows. I love it. It is a lot of work, and it's a lot of like, in the midst of other things I'm already doing a lot of work on, it gets tricky, because it's like, and again, Chris and I talked about this on his podcast, but like that is a thing that blows my mind. And when Bargatze was on ours, like that is a thing that is so fascinating to me about stand-up comedy. And John and I laughed about this on his podcast. It's like, if you get enough of a set list as an artist, you can literally play the same set list, especially after about first 10 years of being an artist. You can pretty much play that set list for the rest of your life. And people will always be happy. 10% will be like, "Oh, I wish you'd played this song." Most of them will be like, "If you're playing the songs I want to hear, they'll come see it." Comedy, you nuke every tour. At the end of every tour, you nuke the whole thing and start all over. So it's the opposite value sets. They want the same thing from a musical artist. They want a new thing every time from a comedian. And so, that inherent problem to me is pretty overwhelming. Because, I mean, that's why those guys and girls are geniuses to me, is because I think it's creatively, it's got to be the most demanding job probably in the world, creatively, because you aren't, I mean, maybe painting and things like that because it's the same idea. But, comedy, you're putting together an hour-long set every year or whatever. And that is so much work. It's just unbelievable how much work that is. And so that part of it for me is like, that feels...
I like that you said comedy is a currency, because we're as a pastor, I stand up before an audience every week. And as a musician, you stand up before somebody every week. There's something about being funny that cuts the audience, that like invites them in with you. So even in what we do, I think it's an important part of it. Like, if you can be funny and authentically funny, like like softens the room and they are invited in to go where you want to go. Yeah. So,
a really valuable lesson I'll tell you that was unbelievably life altering for me. And I've told this story in a lot of podcasts when we talked about humor, but Annie and I just started dating. We were at this restaurant eating with some friends, some of which I knew really well, some I didn't know at all. And there was probably 5 of them. And I can read really quickly when people are like, I can read when people want to give me the power to be that. Like when they're like just defaulting to like, you can talk as much as you want and we will laugh as much as you talk. And in that season of my life, my early 20s, it was cocaine. I mean, it was like I got in this group, we sat down, and for probably an hour, I just held court. And I was killing it. Like if I had merch at that restaurant, I would have sold out. It was like everything I said, they were just lapping up. I floated out of the restaurant. I mean, just floated to the car, sat down. Yeah. Annie and I are dating. I look at Annie and I'm like, that's what you could potentially be getting into, And she looks at me and she says, I'll never forget this. She said, so what was that? And I was like, oh, what do you mean? She's like, what was that in there? And I was like, I'm just making them laugh. She's like, do you remember any of their names? And I was like, not really. And she's like, whatever that is, I want nothing to do with that. That was so selfish. And you in no way tried to encourage other people to. That was the Dave Barnes show. And I have no interest in that. And I just remember it being like, holy cow. And so for me, what I learned that day that I've tried to really do is humor, as much as it can be exhibitionist, it can be extremely communal. And it really can be this beautiful thing that, like, if you do it well, you can pull other people in and make them comfortable to then set them up to talk and to have time and to feel seen and known. And so that's been a really helpful thing for me. It's like, as opposed to just going, it really is a power, but you have to really kind of know how to wield it, because left to itself is just so solitary and, again, exhibitionist. But man, the right people with that gift can be such a blessing to people. They can make you feel comfortable. And it's funny, even now 20 whatever years later, we'll sit down and 20, what did I say that, that'd have been, it's close, probably 18, 19 years ago. We'll have people over. And I'm telling you, every time, Jeff, I have to go, be calculated. Because if I hear it, if I feel the power moving and people stare at me laughing, I'm like, nope, move it. Okay, hey, Jessica, tell me where you went to college again. And okay, it's not mine anymore. And every night we have, and he'll laugh at me because we'll go upstairs, getting ready for bed in the bathroom, and be like, So did you have fun? She's like, oh my gosh, it was so fun. I'm like, okay. Did you feel like she's like, Dave, it was great. You did great. Like, okay, but I still have like this, this trauma in a good way from that conversation. Yeah. But it was really helpful. And so I do think humor is this weird thing of, it can really be such a joiner. It can be such a communal thing, or it can really be so separate. It can really cause like such a, fissure in things.
It's crazy. I mean, I see that how it could be, because it is like a drug. It could be so self-serving. You get a room rolling, and you're just like, let's keep it going. Yeah. And then you never know those people. They just know that you're funny.
That's it. So that's exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, it's
it's the power it has to make people feel comfortable, to make people feel well. And I'll tell you one other quick story. When I did my first, let me finish that thought. The power it has to make people breathe. I can see you're really nervous right now talking to this group, or you don't want to be in this. I'm going to just keep making it fun, and we're laughing. Before you know it, your levels change chemically in your body, and you're like, oh, I'm glad I'm here now. That's amazing. And then two, I've told this story a million times, but I was doing stand-up shows, and I played the show in Chicago. A friend of mine brought a friend of his, and we were talking after the show, and she said, man, that really blessed me, that show. And I was so confused. I was like, bless you? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, I kind of laughed. I was like, how did that bless you? She's like, Dave, I had the worst day at work, like the worst day. I was mad. Now, she was with her husband. She said, now I'm going home happy. And so when I see my kids, I'm going to be smiling. I'm not taking that stuff with me anymore. And I was like, that was like, nuclear in my brain. I was like, wow, like humor really can bless people. Like that was like even in my 30s, that was this incredibly novel idea of like, oh, I've never thought about that. And so that's even more fun now, because I do try to think of it in ways that I'm like, can I bless somebody with this? Like, how can somebody leave here?
Feels very different. Peter Parker's uncle. With great power comes great responsibility.
Maybe, yeah. So I never thought about that. I do consider myself sort of a Spider-Man in many other ways, but so this would make sense.
Oh, we just totally sidetracked here.
That's right.
Well, I appreciate your time. I got one final question. We'll wrap up our show together. Since the show is titled The Collective's Conversation, who is one person, historical, present, fictional, or in real life, that you would love to sit down and have a conversation with?
Oh, man. I mean, this Beatles thing has been so paramount in my mind over these last 2.5 years, and still is. I mean, I'm still neck deep in it. It would have to be Paul McCartney. I mean, that's the dream.
Oh, okay.
Just to sit with him and pick his brain and sort of hear. Yeah, I mean, I have a million questions, but I think it'd be him.
That's wild, because a guest I just had on the show, Jason Romano, who is Sports Spectrum guy. Mm-hmm. He said the exact same answer. He had John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Yeah. So there must be like some Beatles thing in the air right now, because he was the same way. He's like, I've been really into the Beatles, and he's like, I would love to talk to John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And he referenced that the majority of their music was made in like a 6-year span. Like, oh yeah, they just like cranked out.
They were a band for 8 or 9 years, and they were done. That is, like, and Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday when he was 19.
That's stupid.
Which is
I'm 46 and I've done nothing that cool.
Yeah, it's not helpful at all.
Yeah,
at all.
Well, you wrote "God Give Me You," so we can put that.
Like, take that, Paul. Take that.
You're a top 100 Billboard country song of all time. Like, I will stream it today to make sure that's still true.
I needed that serotonin boost. I appreciate that.
I'm trying to help you out.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been great. Thank you for being on the show. Thanks for becoming a new friend. And as we say here at the Collective's Conversation podcast, you've got a seat at the table.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, friends. Thank you for joining us on another incredible episode of the Collective's Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion and want to stay connected to the Collective's Conversation, make sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. If something in the show really spoke to you, tag me on Instagram at Jeff_Pitts_. It would mean so much if you take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It goes a long way into shaping the future of our episodes and reaching a broader audience. We'll see you next week at the table for another great conversation. And be sure to check our follow-up episode titled Things I Learned every Tuesday following that week's episode. And remember, you have a seat at the table.